Welcome and thank you for joining us for another edition of Local Matters. On this week's broadcast, we bring a special episode about the mystery of the Shroud of Turin with our sister station WSFI Spotlight. Hosts AJ Shaw and John Breen interview Russ, a Catholic speaker and author of The Shroud Encounter. He talks all about the Shroud of Turin and much more. To learn more about Russ's work, visit shroudencounter.com, and to learn more of the Shroud of Turin, visit shroud.com. This is part one of a two-part series. A special thank you to Angela Tomlinson for producing this episode. To learn more about our sister station, WSFI, visit wsficatholicradio.org.
This is WSFI Spotlight, a conversation with Catholics living in the light.
Our guest today is Russ Breault, who has spent the last 30 years as a researcher looking into the Shroud of Turin, which is the linen cloth believed by millions to be the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, though he's done this through several in-person experiences and educational resources. And as I mentioned, he's been presenting this to hundreds of audiences over the past 30 years. I am AJ Shaw, your host today. I'm joined by John Breen, who is my co-host. Mr. Breault, thank you so much for your time.
Well, my pleasure to be here, AJ. John?
Yeah, of course. We're glad to have you on. So a lot to discuss here today when it comes to the Shroud. But first off, I just wanted to ask, for those in our audience who may not know, what is the Shroud of Turin?
Well, the shroud, meaning a burial cloth that has wrapped a corpse, of Turin, meaning Turin, Italy, where it's been kept for over 400 years. And in Turin, you have this 14-foot long, yet only 3.5 feet wide, this long, narrow cloth made out of flax, and it bears the faint image of a bearded, crucified man. And for hundreds of years, people have been making pilgrimages to Turin to get a glimpse of the cloth, to venerate it as the authentic burial shroud that wrapped Jesus when he was in the tomb. It has a pattern of blood stains that correlate with the wounds of crucifixion, not just any crucifixion, but specifically Jesus, with a crown of thorns and 30 puncture wounds around the head and massively scourged all over the body. And so now what makes the shroud stand out among anything else that might purport to be a relic is the fact that this is the most analyzed artifact in the world. It's been subjected to thousands of hours of scientific analysis, and the remarkable thing is that it remains a mystery. I mean, that seems rather preposterous, doesn't it, in the 21st century, that we can't figure something out that was allegedly made by some artist in the 14th century. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it remains a mystery is a pretty strong statement in terms of, maybe this thing's authentic after all.
Certainly. So what got you involved in studying it?
Well, a long time ago, I think it was a galaxy far, far away, I was a writer for the college newspaper, and news of the Shroud was very big at that time. Let me just back it up a couple years. In 1978, you had a whole team of scientists, 33 American scientists, traveled to Turin, Italy. They have over 70 crates of gear weighing 10 tons brought from various laboratories throughout the United States. They're going to have access to this cloth for 5 days and nights, continuously, 120 hours, hands-on, performing a multitude of tests. And now this is big news. Something like this doesn't happen in a closet. I mean, everybody knew about it. National Geographic, they did a big article about it in June of 1980, and lots of documentaries and news pieces that were all coming out about it. So I asked if I could write some articles for the college newspaper, and they gave me permission to do it. And so in the fall of 80, a 2-part article series came out, did a lot of research for it, talked to some of the scientists to get some quotes, and I was hooked. I says, man, this is one seriously cool mystery, and nobody knows anything about it. Mm-hmm. And so it became my life's mission. In October of 1981, I attended the first United States symposium on the Shroud, scientific symposium. And that's where all of the scientists that were involved in the project presented their various papers. That's where I got to meet everybody involved in archaeology and chemistry and medical forensics and all the different fields that are involved in Shroud research. And I've just been involved ever since.
It's a very interesting background. So you've been looking into this since 1980. Wow, that's incredible.
Yes,
quite a lifetime commitment to that.
I was a mere child. But yeah, it's a long time
for sure. So I was curious, and John and I were actually having this conversation before our discussion today. The House of Savoy, they actually had it for several years. Do you know how they obtained it?
Well, they bought it in 1453.
Yeah.
It was in the possession of Margaret de Charnay,
mm-hmm.
who was the granddaughter of Geoffrey de Charnay, who was a very famous French knight who first had it when it appeared in France in 1356. And so it was his granddaughter who ended up selling it to the Savoy family in 1453, because she had no heir. She had I think both of her husbands had passed away, and she never had any kids to will it on to. So she wanted to give it to an entity, a family that would have the means to be able to protect it and to preserve it. And the Savoys were quite eager to obtain it, and it ended up being a smart move, because it remained in the Savoy family for 530 years, and only until 1983 did the last king of Italy, who was booted out of Italy after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
He went to live in Portugal in exile. But when he was finally going to pass away, at that point, he willed it to the current living Pope. So only as of 1983 is it actually owned by the Catholic Church. Prior to that, the Catholic Church has always been involved, has been the custodian of the Shroud, but it was owned by the Savoy family.
So, 1983, that would have been Pope John Paul II who was in there at the time, and that's been now in possession of the Catholic Church for over 40 years. That leads into my next question. How has the Catholic Church officially approached the Shroud over time?
Well, the Catholic Church has not made any official statement regarding authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand why, because as I say in my lectures all the time, hey, listen, we don't have the DNA of Jesus to match it up with something we might extract from the Shroud.
Yeah.
So we can't prove it absolutely to be, in fact, the burial shroud of Jesus. Now, what we can do, we can prove what it's not, and then I'll let the audience, they can decide what it is. And one thing we know for sure is that it's not the work of an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's but in as far as the official position of the church is concerned, they often call it either a symbol of Christ's suffering worthy of veneration, or an object of Christ's suffering worthy of veneration. They don't say icon, and they don't say relic. They say they kind of stay clear of those words. And I think to call it a symbol or an object of veneration, I think is fine, because it establishes kind of a middle path. It allows the church to exhibit it and promote veneration of it for either for what it is or what it represents. You decide, and so they're not going to get into the fray.
Gotcha. How does the Shroud fit into the historical record of Jesus Christ's crucifixion and burial?
Well, it factors very prominently. This is all part of the intriguing narrative. From John chapter 20, verses 1 through 9, you have Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb, and
Mm-hmm.
And it's early Sunday morning, and she sees that the stone has already been rolled aside from the entrance, and she peeks in and sees that the body's gone. Runs to find the apostles and says to them, and I quote, "Someone has taken our Lord's body out of the tomb, and I don't know where they put him." So she thinks the body's stolen or taken.
Mm-hmm.
And but remember, she doesn't go inside that tomb. She just peeks in and sees that the body's gone. Peter and John run back down to the tomb. John lets everyone know that he got there first, waits for Peter. Peter finally, he arrives and goes straight inside the tomb and sees the linen cloth lying there. Then John goes in. He also notices the linen cloth lying there and believes. Well, that's pretty interesting, because, so remember, Mary doesn't go in the tomb. She doesn't see that there's a linen cloth lying there. So she thinks the body's stolen. Peter and John run back down, go inside that tomb, see the linen cloth lying there, and John believes. So obviously, they saw something that Mary didn't. What did they see? And what they saw was specifically related to the burial shroud. And so, which is a remarkable thing from an apologetic argument, is think about this then. John then becomes the first of the apostles to believe in the resurrection, and that belief was based on the evidence of the linen cloth lying there in the tomb. Everyone else came to belief in the resurrection because of post-resurrection appearances, but not John. John came to faith in the resurrection because of the evidence lying there in the tomb. Now we have to ask ourselves this question. Was that linen cloth lying in the tomb only for the benefit of Peter and John? Or was it for the benefit of the whole world throughout all generations? And it's like, well, how do you think God works? And I don't think it was meant for some private interpretation. And so the shroud fits prominently into the gospel story.
Question I would have is, like, what happened to the shroud after the resurrection and before it emerges with the French knight that you referred to earlier? Like, what happened to the shroud during that time?
Well, John Calvin, the famous Protestant reformer, posed a big question. To paraphrase him, he said, well, you would think something as significant as Jesus leaving his image on his burial shroud, that would warrant a mention in the gospel somewhere, and it's not an unreasonable objection. However, it is easily answered when you understand the tenor of the times. So when were the Gospels written? 20 to 30 years after the events in question. What was happening? They already killed James. They tried to kill Peter. Persecution was in high swing. You're not going to have any overt mention of this burial shroud, or even who might have it. It's that's going to be silent, because that if you say anything, it's going to set off a search and destroy mission to find it and destroy it, either by the Jews or by the Romans. Both had a vested interest in stamping out this religion, and so it's not unreasonable that the Gospels are silent. In fact, I'll even go a step further and say that the Gospels are strangely silent on it. Is because, let's just pretend for a minute that there's no image on the shroud, because this would be the contention of most people. You see, because after all, even someone who comes from a secular perspective would feel pretty confident that, well, Jesus was a historical figure who lived, and he was probably crucified by the Romans, and he was wrapped in a burial shroud, and they can all go along with that. Where they can't go, of course, is the resurrection, because the resurrection is that becomes a supernatural thing. And so let's just pretend for a minute that there's no image on the shroud at all. Well, you would think then that a cloth bearing the blood of the atonement, the very currency that purchased our salvation, and you would think that alone would warrant a mention of the shroud, and yet it's silent. Now, so let me take you past Constantine. Constantine legalized Christianity essentially in 311 with the Edict of Toleration. So now it was somewhat safe to be a believer, to be a Christian. And so now let's get to the 6th century. And there is a verse that is used in liturgy. It's called the Mozarabic Rite of Holy Week. Mm-hmm. that is brought to Spain by a group of Arab Catholics, and they translate John chapter 20, verses 5 and 6. They translate it this way. They say, Peter and John ran to the tomb and saw the recent imprints of the dead and risen man on the linens. Now, this liturgy goes back 1,500 years, and why would they choose to translate John chapter 5 and 6, John chapter 20, 5 and 6 that way, unless it was based on something that they had seen or had knowledge of, or even was passed down through oral tradition? And so that right there is an incredible piece of historical data, and again, 1,500 years old.
Wow. We have to go into a break. Let's come back to this in a minute.
This is Mark Curran. Are you in need of a trial lawyer? My career in both law and politics has been spent fighting for the injured and most vulnerable. Martindale Hubbell has given me the highest rating in ethics and ability. If you want a trial lawyer with the highest rating in ethics and ability that will not support the evil agenda destroying America, but will support WSFI Catholic Radio, well, you can learn more at 847-721-3189 or go to markcurranlaw.com.
The Holy Family Catholic Bookstore is blessed with the opportunity to participate with WSFI Catholic Radio in the new evangelization. Holy Family is your local resource for books, CDs, and DVDs from Catholic Answers, Ignatius Press, and all of the other fine publishers featured on Catholic Radio. Holy Family also has the area's largest selection of baptism, communion, and confirmation gifts. Holy Family Catholic Bookstore is located at 9249 Old Green Bay Road, Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. More information is available on Facebook.
Want an example of a false sense of security? How about relying on the life insurance you get through work to pay for all of your final expenses? Do you have plans to retire someday? Or do you plan on working for that company for the rest of your life? The fact is, you may lose your life insurance when you leave a company. I'm Matt Tomlinson from Catholic Financial Life, and I invite you to share your hopes and dreams with me. To discuss your options for protecting your family, call me at 847-548-MATT. That's 847-548-6288. Products and services not available in all states.
Hello, I'm Bill Winnington from the Church of St. Mary's and the Chicago Bulls. I believe Catholic radio is important for all of us out there listening to help us through days when maybe our faith is being challenged by many different obstacles that are put in our way, and it's a chance to reflect and just think and hear stories from other people that maybe are going through the exact same issues that we are going through and how they have struggled and how they are getting through their problems today.
WSFI 88.5 FM Catholic Radio is committed to bringing quality Catholic programs to our local community. We only can do that with your financial support. Take a moment now to donate online at WSFIRadio.org or mail your tax-deductible donation to WSFI 88.5 FM Catholic Radio, P.O. Box 885, Libertyville, Illinois 60048. That's WSFI 88.5 FM Catholic Radio, P.O. Box 885, Libertyville, Illinois 60048. Donations of any amount are greatly appreciated.
We welcome you back to WSFI Spotlight. I'm AJ Shaw, joined by my co-host John Breen. We are talking with Russ Breault on the Shroud of Turin. And what was something during your years of research that has puzzled you or amazed you the most about the Shroud?
Well, I think the most unique attribute of the Shroud is the superficial nature of the image. And it's really important to understand this, is that when you're anyone in your audience wants to Google the Shroud or look at it, on a website or something, book, you'll see the first thing you'll see is a pattern of burns and patches from a fire in 1532. It's kept in a silver box. The top of the box melted, and a glob of molten or melted silver fell down onto a corner. The cloth was folded in 16 layers, so now we have 16 burns. And so it was patched up, but the image lies in between those two parallel lines, which are nothing more than burns and patches and scorch marks. And it was doused with water. You have a pattern of water stains. You have a pattern of blood stains. Now, if you flip the cloth over you'll see all those things. You'll see the burns, you'll see the water stains, you'll see the blood stains, but you will not see the image of the man. The image of the man is a purely superficial phenomenon affecting only the top 1 to 2 microfibers, not threads, microfibers. Each individual thread is made up of about 200 microfibers. So that means that this image resides on about 1% of a single thread wherever the image is.
Wow.
And it is uniform in intensity, top to bottom, front to back. It never varies in density. And so it's like, whoa, what kind of medieval artistic process is this? Because you see, one of the most important things we have to keep in mind with the Shroud is that I call it the probably the greatest either or proposition, ever, which is either the Shroud of Turin is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, or it's not. And if it's not, well, then what is it? If it's not authentic, well, then it must be the work of an artist or a clever forger, fraudster, whatever. It has to be the work of human effort somehow, some way, if it's not authentic. And if that's the case, then surely we should find some trace of paint, ink, dye, pigmentation, stain, and yet there are no artistic substances on the cloth that are there to form this image. There are random particles of various things on the shroud. It's been around for a long time, and so, in fact, there's been over 50 painted copies of the shroud have been laid onto the surface of the cloth to sanctify it, like signing a baseball card. And it's and so we know that happened for over the course of several centuries. And sure, paint particles are going to get dislodged and onto the cloth itself, but there's nothing in the image areas that would bring forth the image itself. And so this is really probably the most profound aspect of it, because when someone just glibly says, well, that thing, probably from the Middle Ages. Okay, well, who's the artist? Because he's not identified. There's no one in the 14th century capable of having crafted the shroud. We've looked at all their work. And it's just flat out not the work of an artist, which is, the primary the conclusion of the Shroud project. And it's so that's the most intriguing thing. And then secondarily to that, you have the whole pattern of blood stains, and the blood stains test positive for 13 different blood components, including bile, bilirubin, serum albumin, hemoglobin. Now, bilirubin is really interesting, is because bilirubin is a breakdown component of the red blood cells that occurs during conditions of severe stress. And I think maybe crucifixion would qualify
for sure.
And it's and so you even have some very intriguing things with the blood. And let me say this last thing, is that when you look, you really have two sets of images here. You have a whole pattern of blood stains, which forms one image, but then you have the image of the man, and they happened separately at two different periods of time. The whole pattern of blood stains occurred first, followed by the image. When did the image get there? I don't know. Maybe 3 days later. All we know is later, right? And so, and the reason we know this is because there's no image under the blood. If there's no image under the blood, then that means the blood was on the cloth first, followed by the image, which makes sense if it's authentic, Good Friday followed by Easter Sunday, but it makes no sense if it's the work of an artist. And no artist would even think about crafting a whole pattern of bloodstains and then trying to craft an image around it. No one would do it. No one would even think about doing that. And so this is kind of a remarkable thing. It's almost analogous to how do you get DNA before you have the cell. God puts that big conundrum out there. It's and the same thing with the shroud. How do you have blood first followed by image?
Growing up, I knew about the Shroud of Turin, and I think I had this question in my mind. I think a lot of other Catholics do, where I think the closest comparison that they make with the Shroud of Turin is the true cross that Christ was crucified on. And most of us know the story of how the recovered crucifix, the cross, was authenticated, and that was through miracles. So if you were to draw a comparison, say, for the Shroud of Turin versus the cross, which has been thoroughly authenticated through numerous miracles, a lot of people would point out and say, well, where's the miracle in connection to the Shroud of Turin, But I kind of wonder, though, and I just kind of want to bounce this off of you, is perhaps the miracle is in its own preservation over 2,000 years.
Well, from a physical miracle, yeah, I do think that may be a possibility. I don't want to discount the fact that it's made out of flax, which is a very durable material. It's made of a 3-to-1 herringbone pattern weave. It's a complex weave, doable in first century, but it's expensive. But it also has a lot of strength and durability. So even just the materials and the manufacture of the cloth have aided in its preservation. But when it comes to miracles, I get this question from time to time, and there are millions of miracles associated with the shroud.
Okay.
They are miracles of faith. I tell people all the time, you've all heard the expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. The shroud takes you right up to the water's edge, but and nothing else does that. It's not going to take you past the water. You're still going to have to make a decision for yourself as to who Jesus is, because he's not in that shroud anymore. All the time when I do presentations, and I do them all the time, I'm always hoping for the doubting Thomas.
That's all the time we have this week. Tune in next week at this same time for the conclusion of this broadcast. Thank you for listening to another edition of WQPH's Local Matters. We hope you enjoyed the broadcast and hope you have a blessed week.